What originally inspired me to do this video was a comment by an individual whose name I forgot on YouTube under one of Libertarian Realist 2's videos to Evogen. This individual in question stated that there can be no subspecies within the human species because the FST value is too low. For there to be different subspecies within the species of Homo sapiens, we need to have an FST value of 0.25. What I first want to note is that subspecies is not exactly the same as race, and we are arguing for race, not subspecies. But subspecies is very close to race, and they are oftentimes used interchangeably, almost as synonyms, despite that they are not, by qualified scientists. Now, a quick Google search regarding FST values and subspecies will, on Wikipedia pages and other pages, result in showing that there need to be a FST value of 0.25 for there to be subspecies within a species in the animal kingdom. But this is not exactly true, and hence this video, hence this correction. Let me see if I got this chronologically right in my mind, because I'm doing this off the cuff. This is how it has went down. The FST value of 0.25 comes originally from civil rights. And I think it comes from Civil Rights, Evolution and the Genetics of Populations, a treatise, Chicago, University of Chicago Press, 1968. Alright, so that's where it comes from, and I've used this figure myself. What then happened is that a number of individuals misrepresented what both civil rights and what Smith et al. 1997 has stated regarding the matter. So what we find on Wikipedia and what we find in YouTube comments is people repeating scientists who misunderstood or misread the original source for the 0.25 figure. That is what has happened, and the exact chronological order in which it has happened I do not remember, but I will go you through this. I've just given you the conclusion that whenever you hear someone say that for there to be subspecies within the species of humans, it is not the same as saying that for there need to be 0.25 FST value or higher. It's not the same as saying that for there to be races within the human species, there need to be an FST value of 0.25 or higher, because they're not the same thing. Subspecies and race is not the same thing, although they are sometimes used interchangeably and as synonyms. Emphasis on sometimes. Second of all, the 0.25 FST value for there to be subspecies is wrong. The people who are repeating the 0.25 FST value within science were, for example, Graves, 2010, Templeton, 1998, Lau and Kaiser, 2009, and Kittles and Weiss, 2003. They cite Templeton, who misread Smith. So here is, for example, Graves, 2010, misreading civil right in 1978. Okay, so this is quoting Graves 2010, or Graves misquoting or misrepresenting civil right 2010. Quote, in 1978, Civil Rights published a 4-volume treatise entitled The Evolution and Genetics of Populations. Volume 4 is devoted to variability within and among populations. Chapters 9 and 10 of this volume focus on variability within human populations and what he describes as racial differentiation in mankind. However, on careful examination we see that Wright, based on his own criteria for the existence of race, contradicted himself. The mean FST did not exceed nor did it come close to his pre-established value for the existence of subspecies, which he equated with geographical race. FST need to be above 0.25. Graves 2010. Biological 5, Social Definitions of Race, Implications for Modern Biomedical Research. But here is what Wright actually said. There is no question that all mankind constitutes a single species in view of the absence of any physiological bar to hybridization between the most diverse races or of any recognizable loss of vigor in the first or latter generations. There is also no question, however, that populations that have long inhabited separated parts of the world should, in general, be considered to be of different subspecies by the usual criterion that most individuals of such populations can be allocated correctly by inspection. It does not require a trained anthropologist to classify an array of Englishmen, West Africans, and Chinese with 100% accuracy by features, skin color, and type of hair, in spite of so much variability within each of these groups that every individual can easily be distinguished from every other. It is, however, customary to use the term race rather than subspecies for the major subdivisions of the human species, as well as for minor ones. Diversification is much greater on the average among than within the major races, but there is more uniformity within than among. The great differences among loci indicates that more than pure sampling drift is involved. This was said by Wright, 1978, Evolution and the Genetics of Populations, Volume 4, Variability Within and Among Natural Populations, University of Chicago Press, Chicago, Illinois, page 439 to 440. It doesn't take careful examination to see that Wright did not define subspecies in terms of having a FST above 0.25. What he instead did was that he defined subspecies in the same manner Smith et al. Did 1997, and I will get to that. First, I would like to emphasize that what Wright said was races, that populations that have long inhabited separated parts of the world should in general be considered to be different subspecies by the usual criterion that most individuals of such populations can be allocated correctly by inspection. That's the criterion, not 0.25. That is the criterion. But he did say that it is, however, customary to use the term race rather than subspecies for the major subdivisions of the human species. I will probably repeat this toward the end, as to emphasize that that was what the video aimed at. That was the conclusion of the originator of the claim that for subspecies to exist there need to be 0.25. This does not apply to human races, which is what leftards are running around on YouTube and the Wikipedia pages claiming and misrepresenting. Now see, well, Wright's position is like Smith et al.'s position, and as I stated before, Templeton misrepresent Smith et al. And Sewell Wright. Templeton 1998 states, quote, "A standard criterion for a subspecies or race in the non-human literature under the traditional definition of a subspecies as a geographically circumscribed, sharply differentiated population is to have FST values of at least 0.25 to 0.30, Smith et al., 1997. Hence, as judged, and we will go over Smith et al., 1997, we will go over what he actually said. But he continued, hence, as judged by the criterion in the non-human literature, the human FN value is too small to have taxonomic significance under the traditional subspecies definition, although human races do not satisfy the standard quantitative criterion for being traditional subspecies." And he goes on to again emphasize that he quoted Smith. And this was by Templeton, 1998, Human Races, A Genetic and Evolutionary Perspective. Here's what Smith et al. Actually said, quote, "The non-discrete nature of subspecies is evident from their definition as geographic segments of any given gonochoristic," and gonochoristic means bisexually reproducing species differing from each other to a reasonably practical degree, e.g. at least 70 to 75%, but to less than totality. All subspecies are allopatric, either dicopatric, which means with non-contiguous ranges, or parapatric, which means with contiguous ranges, except for cases of circular overlap with symmetry. Symmetry is conclusive evidence, except for cases of circular overlap, of allospecificity, which is separate specific status. Parapatric subspecies, and parapatric means with contiguous ranges, interbreed and exhibit intergradation in contact zones, but such taxa maintain the required level of distinction in one or more characters outside of those zones. Dicopatric populations, that is, with non-contiguous ranges, are regarded as subspecies if they fail to exhibit full differentiation, i.e. exhibit overlapping variation of their differentia up to 25 to 30%. Even in the absence of contact overlap exceeding 25 to 30%, does not qualify for taxonomic recognition of either dicopatric populations or of parapatric populations. The use of multivariate statistical procedures can provide approaches that are reasonably objective and not dependent on preconceptions about taxonomic membership. Nonetheless, the discriminatory power of such methods depends critically on the quality of the characters being analyzed, and in addition, the adopted standard level of differentiation required for taxonomic recognition. Multivariate analysis, Thorpe 1987, are useful techniques for substantiation of subspecific validity, with revival of the now generally neglected 75% or similar rule. Smith et al., 1997, Subspecies and Classification. So, not only do they not discuss FST, but based on their criteria, human populations clearly qualify as subspecies. The 20 to 25% they refer to is the percent of correct assignments of individuals to a population. See Amadon, 1949. It's not FST values of 0.25. It is a correct assignment of individuals to a population with 70 to 75% accuracy. This is where the mistake is done, and I will again emphasize that towards the end of this video. And Luigi Qualis-Forza and Walter Bodmer, they recognize this definition, they recognize this fact. They say, quote, races could be called subspecies if we adopted for man a criterion from systematic zoology. The criterion is that two or more groups become subspecies when 75%, remember that figure, or more of all individuals constituting the groups can be unequivocally classified as belonging to a particular group. So they got it right. They read civil right right. They go on to say that when human races are defined broadly, it is possible to identify the race of many more than 75% of the population. Hence, races certainly exist among humans. They said this 1976 on page 698. Someone might object here and say, well, hey, hold on here. Qualis-Forza and Monasi in Piazza 1994 on page 19 said that the concept of race has failed to gain any acceptance. But that is totally fine, because in 2000 Qualis-Forza said on page 25, quote, race is a group of individuals that we can recognize as biologically different from others. So it appears that he has made a resolution to deny the existence of race, but every now and then he forgets and the R word slips out. Now why might he do this? Why is he inconsistent? Why is he having a Freudian slip? That's neither here nor there. The point is Qualis-Forza got it right. That's one scientist that I know that understood the 0.25 figure correctly, unlike Templeton and Graves, for an example. So Qualis-Forza, he got it. So Qualis-Forza got it right. So Qualis-Forza got civil rights number right. With humans using multivariate analysis, individuals can be assigned to populations with well over 90% accuracy, Koningsberg 2009, but I believe Neil Reich also did a study which showed that self-identified race and ethnicity is accurate with 99.9% accuracy. So there is no FST criteria for subspecies. So I'm glad we've cleared that up. Now further, Levontine's fallacy. It was in the year 2002 that someone explained the basic problems with Levontine's famous 15%. It was Henry Harpending replying to a question from Frank Salter. Levantine had noted that 85% of the genetic variability was among individuals within populations, and only an additional 15% was added when individuals in different populations were compared. However, this analysis omits a third level of variability, the within individual one. The point is that we are diploid organisms. Getting one set of chromosomes from one parent and a second from the other. To the extent that your mother and father are not especially closely related, then those two sets of chromosomes will come close to being a random sample of the chromosomes in your population. And the sets present in some randomly chosen members of yours will also be about as different from your two sets as they are from one another. So how much of the variability will be distributed where? First is the 15% that is interpopulational. The other 85% will then split half and half, 42.5%, between the intra and inter-individual within population comparisons. The increase in the variability in between population comparisons is thus 15% against the 42.5% that is between individual within population. Thus, 15 divided with 42.5 equals 32.5%. This should be 35%. So a much more impressive and more important, more legitimate value than the 15% provided by Levantine. In the animal kingdom, the subdivisions and the subcategories below the human species has moderate genetic differentiation. We do not have, compared to other species in the animal kingdom, little genetic differentiation. But sure, we do not have, compared to other subdivisions of other species in the animal kingdom, great genetic differentiation either. But we do have moderate genetic differentiation. There's a lot of other species that have a much lower FST value and lower genetic differentiation than does the human species, whose special subdivisions we do not call into question at all. And as a reference, I would like to refer to Civil Rights as Evolution and the Genetics of Populations, a treatise, Chicago, University of Chicago Press, 1968. So it's interesting that the FST value that leftists run around and claim is too low that the FST value that the human species has, that is about 0.10 to 0.15, 0.10, 0.12 to 0.15 if I remember it correctly, is deemed to be too low for subspecies classification for humans, even though many other subspecies of other species in the animal kingdom have lower FST values, I guess because they're animals and we're humans and we have important feelings to care about. The criteria that applies to humans does not apply to animals. But what Wright said was races, that populations that have long inhabited separated parts of the world should in general be considered to be different subspecies by the usual criterion that most individuals of such populations can be allocated correctly by inspection. That's the criterion, not 0.25. That is the criterion. But he did say that it is, however, customary to use the term race rather than subspecies for the major subdivisions of the human species. The 20 to 25% they refer to is the percent of correct assignments of individuals to a population. See Amadon, 1949. It's not FST values of 0.25. It is a correct assignment of individuals to a population with 70 to 75% accuracy. This is where the mistake is done. So race is more of a basket case than is, say, a specific phenotypical trait. And just to show how much of a basket case race is, consider this. The warrior gene, it has a huge impact on social behavior. It is highly correlated with crime. And it does not even show up as an SNP because it is not an SNP. However, a recent study determined that 58% of SNPs are population-specific. See Molly Persversky and Ryan Hernandez. And it's not just how many SNPs there are that matters. What matters is also how they are expressed. 25% of the SNPs that Richard Spielman and Vivian Chang found differs in expression between the races. That is 1,097 genes out of a single cell line of 4,197 genes that they chose to measure from. The 3.1 billion base pairs that make up 30,000 genes, a single change in a base pair can alter a gene. The 3.1 billion base pairs provide plenty of room for racial differences and continental differences for IQ, etc. And again, I want to emphasize that it is 3.1 billion base pairs that make up 30,000 genes. And again, a single change in a base pair, one of these 3.1 billion base pairs, can alter one of the 30,000 genes. SNV differences differ 12% between the races or continental populations, and SNPs differ 25 to 35% between the races or continental populations. To put this in perspective, if the human genome is likened to a book, then a single SNP difference is a single word spelled wrong, and a single SNV is a whole page that is different. Furthermore, some biologists now believe that recent evolution, including positive selection, has largely been characterized by genetic changes not caught by scans for selective sweeps. Hence, relying on scans for selective sweeps to determine the amount of racially specific positive selection is unjustified. So we can't count on SNPs to find all the potentially positive selection that might differ between racial populations. So the point is, race is a lot more of a genetic basket case than a single phenotypical trait. So IQ is a polygenetic trait, aggression might be a polygenetic trait, immune system might be polygenetic, and if you just focused on a certain IQ score, finding the specific genes, alleles, and proteins and acids that make up for a certain IQ score, then it is very possible that we could assign two individuals from two different races into a specific category. For an example, there might be one white person that has as much of the warrior gene as a black person, but he might simultaneously have a higher IQ than the black person. So if we can assign individuals to racial groups with 75% accuracy based upon taking into consideration all the genetic markers, SNPs, that encompasses and includes these potentially between racial population behavioral differences in cognitive ability and physical traits. If we can assign 75% of individuals into racial categories, doing this, taking in consideration the whole genotype, then we have human races. There might be one white person that has as much of the warrior gene as a black person, but he might simultaneously have a higher IQ. So there are a lot of different traits that will impact what impact the warrior gene will have on you. Will you be a good businessman who's not afraid of taking risks, that have good upbringing and wealthy parents in a rich environment? Or will the same person with the same warrior gene, due to his parents having a lower IQ and himself having a lower IQ, be more likely to act on the warrior gene? So based upon all the genes, based upon the whole genotype, if we can categorize individuals with over 75% accuracy into different races, which we can, not just specific traits, not just specific blood types, not just specific IQ points, but looking at all the traits combined, then we have races, and that we do.